Good evening, my Liberty.me friends. Actually, good evening, my Liberty.me friends. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. It's an exciting book tonight. We're going to be talking about an old book called The Joys of Living. It's a very old-fashioned book in some way, but I think it's extremely relevant to our times. I'm looking forward to introducing it to you, so thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I'm just realizing when I opened up this Hangout, I clicked the button that said it's for 18 and older. So if you're younger than 18, then you can't be here. So we need to probably figure out some adult style thing to do here to make sense of the fact that I clicked that button. Maybe a lot of people are watching simply because I clicked that button. So, I don't know. Anyway, it's really good to have you here. I'm going to try to look at the chat window. Maybe Daniel is with us here tonight and he can shoot me some questions if anybody has them as I go along here. We're going to be discussing an older book by Orson Svet Marden, who lived from 1850 to 1924. Great sociologist of the Gilded Age. Fascinating author that I just went nuts for some years ago because I found his book called Why They Succeeded, and it's the kind of biographies of Gilded Age entrepreneurs. In the years before World War I, he was the founder of Success, and was a great champion of free enterprise. Mostly, he was a champion of succeeding in life. That was his big thing. And I love reading him because, unlike any author since, to some extent, every author, in the 20th century after World War I and all the way up to the 21st century, is spoiled to some extent ruined in his or her worldview by the fact of the terrible oppressions that came about from World War I and the horrors of the 20th century. It's very important when you read any of this sort of Victorian style literature, any of this Belle Epoque, sort of prose of late 19th century, to remember this is a different time and place. And it's right at the tail end of the age of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire had extended upwards of 100 years. In America, we had, of course, the Civil War, which was horrible. But for the most part, we believed in liberty. We believed in progress, and we believed in a kind of possibility of universal prosperity and peace. We thought we had discovered the tricks. We thought we had found the means to make the world an ever better place, and we thought we would never go back to the age of feudalism, of oppression, of dueling, of tribalism, of clansmanship. That generation believed that the world of the future would be a world dominated by merit, not by position and social class. That the leaders of the future would not be government officials, but rather they would be accomplished tycoons who had gifted to the world lower prices, ever better technologies, and that things like enterprise and trade were going to create the world for us that the government was somehow never able to make. The Gilded Age entrepreneurs themselves imagined that they were a kind of a new aristocracy and that they had redefined the functioning of history itself. So in old Europe, their aristocracy came about through conquest, essentially. That's how you became a state, was through conquest. And the first thing you would do is start giving away lands to people who are loyal to you. And then titles followed that. And from the titles came the power. So the aristocracy ruled. Whether they had ever done anything, it didn't really matter. It didn't matter if you had accomplished anything. All that mattered is who you knew and what your birth order was, where you came from. That was the English system, that was the German system, that was the French system, that was every system in Europe. America was founded on a different idea. It's founded on the equality of position of everybody, at least potentially. Anybody could become a member of the elites. Anybody could become, in effect, an aristocrat. So what determined who succeeded and who failed? or rather, who succeeded and who didn't succeed as much, right? Since as this generation didn't really believe in failure. It was all determined by what you accomplished in free enterprise. If you served your customers well, you made a brand new product, you made a new invention that permitted progress to happen in the world, you would be rewarded with people buying your stuff that would make you wealthy, and then your wealth allowed you to be a great philanthropist, to have influence over the educational life of the nation, to be dominant in structuring the civic culture, and so on. A new aristocracy, a world in which merit would prevail over over power. And even if you look at the presidents that followed in the U.S. after Lincoln and before Woodrow Wilson, hardly even remembers the names. So they're called the postage stamp presidents for a reason, because they didn't have much power, didn't have much influence, and they weren't the deciders. They weren't the people who were driving history forward. The people who made the history at the time were the Gilded Age entrepreneurs. As a series that came out some years ago on American Public Television or something called them. They were the men who built America, was the name of the series. Only because it did just cover men, but actually Marden was the biographer of this generation, and he was always attentive to draw attention to the women in particular who made a difference in this period. It was a new moment in history. Nothing like it had ever existed, and that generation really did believe in. They believed in progress, and they believed that they were redefining and restructuring the way history would heretofore work. Because right here in America, we had found the system, and it's interesting to think about it too, because many of the daughters of the great entrepreneurs of this time, you would quite frequently be married into, or at least be encouraged to marry into the lineage of the failed and increasingly broke European aristocracy. So the daughter of some coal entrepreneur, would marry Lord Cumberbatch of Westerford's eldest son, who had no money. And so that way they could experience the life of aristocracy and have money at the same time. Part of this inbreeding of this generation was a strategy to kind of to recreate the aristocracy on a new basis, one based on merit instead of birth. A very beautiful dream. We, of course, we don't think about this that much anymore, but if you go back to the 1880s and 1890s, this is a big deal. We had been through 100 years of the age of laissez-faire, both in Europe and America, with the exception of Civil War here. And we had found the secret. Science was advancing. Especially after the Civil War, the technology was taking off. I mean, railroads were an awesome thing. We saw the development of internal combustion. Steel was incredible, because steel, it ended the age of Iron Age, which lasted from the classical world basically into the 1870s. And suddenly with steel, you could build bridges, and you could traverse large amounts of land, and you could move large vehicles over rivers. We were conquering nature, and you could build not just out, but up. So suddenly you began to see American cities grow up into the sky. And what are we doing when we build up in the sky? And we're illustrating the greatness of the human mind, that we're even able to conquer space, like that. And then of course flight just seemed to confirm it. This, people sometimes treat this generation as being old-fashioned and stodgy, and to some extent, they developed their own forms of stodginess, as the years went by. By the 1910s or so, mothers were all trying to keep their daughters at home, to inherit take over the social calendar of the house and so on. But But at least in the 1880s, they were very much a progressive generation. I mean, this is the generation that was first to put electricity in their homes and to have hot and cold running water inside. And putting electricity in your home was a very edgy thing. I mean, people would warn about coming fires, but no, this generation believed in progress, and they thought whatever kind of mistakes they could make, they could always be overcome, and the next iteration would be better than the last. Science was progressing. So the beautiful thing about reading any of this man's works, and he wrote, I don't know, 20 books or something like that, is that you can get a sample of what it was, of this mentality and this outlook on life. Profoundly optimistic, hugely dedicated to personal character as a life strategy, a belief that there were no barriers in the world too high that could not be overcome through hard work, intelligence, persistence, honesty, honest dealings, enterprising spirit. And Orson Swett Marden was the author of that ideology, which he drew from his extensive interviews with people that he did through all his years as the editor of Success magazine. I admire him very, very much. This is one of his last books. It was published in 1913, I think very significantly because the war had broken out. The dream of the 1890s, the vision of a world of peace and prosperity had already begun to collapse. And we began to see the dawn of this 20th century, which would be a very different realization of these hopes and these dreams that would all be sort of trashed against the rocks. So this is his last book, and the book is very interesting because it's called The Joys of Living. He wants to reach deep into the psychology of the human person and find out the things that cause us to succeed versus the things that cause us to fail. And his intuition is that it really doesn't have anything to do with the conditions of life that are around us. We're no more or less likely to succeed or fail because of the institutions in which we live. There's always, in all times and all places, in his view, an opportunity to be joyful and to find and to happiness all around you, and to succeed by overcoming the barriers, whether they be natural, artificial, consequence of your birth, whatever. There's no barrier too high that you can't overcome. Here's why I think this book is so important. I remember the first time I picked it up and began to read it because it's a little bit like the one I covered last week. Henry Hazlitt's book on the way to willpower. It's what you might call a self-help book, but I like this book because it's not just strictly psychology. It's about how to look around the world and find the beauty all around you, and not take anything for granted, but to be thrilled and inspired by the productivity and miracles that are in your presence. When I first read it, it spoke to me very deeply because I sort of had inadvertently adopted this philosophy myself, which I think every free enterprise person should adopt. And I hadn't really understood that I had until I began to read this, and I thought, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm really identifying with this guy. He lived 10 years after he wrote this book, but I think this might have been his last book. He said that he wrote that the greatest discovery of the time of the late 19th century was not technology. It wasn't flight. It wasn't internal combustion. It was a philosophy, and it's a philosophy that the human mind is the single most productive resource on the planet. It's more powerful than all the natural resources or man-made machinery. It's the human mind itself that's the source of progress and prosperity. And it took humankind several millennia to discover this, that it wasn't in what you owned that made you likely to succeed or made you wealthy, but in what you believed. That was the decisive thing in your life. the age of laissez-faire had discovered that previous generations had been trapped by fate, by class, social position, or all these forces that are more powerful than they. But the generation of the Belle Epoque saw the truth that nothing could contain an idea. And that's why there's so many great men and women around that believed in and acted upon these ideas. Madsen became a kind of a philosopher of so many. He was a personal philosopher, I guess you could say, of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, J.P. Morgan. You can kind of go through the list. So why do I think this book, and I'm going to talk to you about more about some of his secrets to what he thinks are the secrets to success in life. Why do I think this is an important book for libertarians? Well, I think it has something to do with, and I've found myself increasingly intrigued by this topic. What happens to your state of mind once you discover the truth of human liberty, and actually more powerfully and much more dangerously, discover the destructive effects of the state? It's what we sometimes call waking up. You're awestruck at what liberty has created in the world, dug us out of a state of nature, fed the planet, brought us double, triple, quadruple the lifespans of ages past, supported massive amount of population that would have been inconceivable to support in ages past, created new innovations to make our lives better. And when you realize the source of all this is human liberty, you're awestruck. But then there's the next stage when you become increasingly aware of the state and what it does to diminish liberty and to take away opportunity and impoverish the world and bring about war, create massive injustice in the world, to pillage and loot and lie and trick people into believing that the state, this parasitical beast on the planet, is actually a source of our social belongingness. It gives us meaning. Patriotism consists in our loyalty to it, and so on. And when we realize that all this is wrong, we can be overcome with a sense of despair. And I don't need to tell you this, right? I mean, you only have to hang out in the world of libertarian ideas for really a day to discover that it's overwhelming how people can get consumed by this. I mean, look at our Facebook feeds. We share cop beatings, people being arrested for trying to sell lemonade, data on the number of people in jail, the horrors of what happens to whistleblowers and government bureaucracies, exploding debt, lives why libertarians sometimes, they go beyond just libertarianism. They dip into apocalyptic predictions of the future. Oh, the dollar's going to die tomorrow. This country is descending into tyranny. Everybody needs to get out, or dig a big hole, in the backyard and start assembling canned goods and water and so on. You can become a prepper and a doomsdayer and a cynic, and increasingly alienated from life itself. And I don't want to take on any of these tendencies, directly from an empirical point of view, because there's plenty of reasons to be, how should I say, cautious about the future. Nobody can look at the national debt and not worry. The problem is when this outlook becomes psychologically debilitating to us, when it depresses us, and we've got the weight of the world on our shoulders. I remember some years after, I think it was after 2012. There's a lot of libertarian activists extant, and people get consumed, for example, about the evil of drones and the evil of war and what the U.S. did with Iraq and what we're doing to Afghanistan. For God's sake, I mean, just yesterday, the U.S. bombed a hospital in Afghanistan, Doctors Without Borders hospital killing 19 people, more people than were killed in Oregon in that mass shooting the other day. Directly at the hands of the U.S. government. Yes, collateral damage, not intentional, so on, but it's just a real fact. It really happened, and we're appalled. We notice that our fellows are not upset. Tonight, instead of seething about that, most people sat down and watched the Packers game and drank beer with their friends. uh, uh, and we wonder what would happen if people were equally as angry as we are. Could we change the system? And maybe the reason the system isn't changing is that my friends aren't mad enough, and I'll do my best to make them mad. But then when they stop wanting to be around me because I'm a depressing, ghastly person, then I feel like I have to take on their absence of anger. I have to make it. I have to make it my own. I have to get angry enough for uh, everybody around me, and that will help accomplish the goal. And so you end up sacrificing all your joy and your happiness in life for this cause of liberty. And then you discover one day that no matter how angry you get and how many articles you write and how many signs you put out in your front yard or on your bumper sticker, how many blogs you post or how many memes you share, you still aren't making a difference. Then you begin to feel powerless, and then your life it seems to be without value, without direction, and you've gutted yourself. You wake up one day and the joy is gone, and yet the hours are ticking by, and you are getting older, and time is inexorably moving towards the last days for you on earth, the one life you have to live, and then you're dead, and you die unhappy. I think that's a regrettable story, and I don't think it should be inevitable. Um, I don't think libertarians have that obligation. For one thing, it doesn't help improve the world. It just doesn't. It doesn't make your anger is not making the world a freer place. Your loathing of the state is not making it go away. Um, all it's doing is ruining you personally and taking away the opportunities that you might see around you, opportunities to make the world a better place, opportunities to be creative. Um, just by way of illustration, I was just at the offices of Uber in San Francisco, and it was an extraordinary experience. I can just tell you, it was awesome to go into a room where there's a low hum punctuated by a kind of a symphony of tiny clicks on keyboards, and young people all over the place with maps, pulling them up and communicating with instant messaging with people all around the world, and maps of drivers and things moving, and hundreds and really thousands of people sitting and doing this quietly with smiles on their faces, talking softly. There's an atmosphere of joy, an atmosphere of creativity, and really technological awesomeness was happening in that room. And you consider what they were doing. What were they doing, actually? Well, what they're doing is connecting people to peer to peer, connecting drivers with riders, making it possible for people who have value to add to the world, providing the technology to enable them to do it through their mobile applications and systematically through their work in every major city in America and most minor ones today, and even tiny ones. They're disabling and crushing, challenging, certainly, in many cases, disabling, and oftentimes demolishing government monopolies all over the world through technology. That's an awesome thing. Now, you know, this is an inspiring sight to see the power of technology, how in one room and in an office building, people through pure communication, through pure enterprise and entrepreneurship, were bringing down uh, structures of the state all over the world. I'm to the point that even taxi medallions in New York that were selling for $1 million are now possibly have no market left for them whatsoever, all in a short 18 months. I couldn't help but think of this book. Here's an example. For 50 years, people have been angry about these monopolies, angry, shaking their fists at it, denouncing them, writing policy position papers, furious. What can we do? What can we do? And yet, um, you know, a small handful of entrepreneurs reimagined the way transportation could work, put together a mobile app, hired people, took a risk, um, fought little battles, one city at a time, all over the world, and came up with an unbelievably powerful idea, an idea more powerful than all the local governments in the world, and swept through it by unleashing human energy. Now, I consider this to be an awesome thing, to have come up with that idea at one that didn't really seem plausible. I mean, I talked with several VC funders in Silicon Valley who said, yeah, when Uber was first proposed, many people looked at it and said, that will never work. Uh, that's just not gonna fly. Government will shut it down immediately. This is a bad idea. But the power of people wanting to get together and exercise their rights to trade, it turns out to be more powerful than all the government regulations combined. So, I throw that out there as an illustration. It's like, you know, maybe anger is not the best way to free the world. It's maybe necessary at some level. Maybe it's not always destructive. It can be personally destructive, especially if it distracts you from finding creative ways to solve problems for the whole of humanity, maybe for one country, one city, your circle of friends, or maybe just for yourself. It takes a turn of mind, a shift from only looking at barriers, only looking at the evil, to seeing possibilities around you. And then that can inspire you to take the courage to act on them and actually make the world a better place. And at the end, you could actually end up changing the world in ways that all of your protests and anger and despair are not changing the world. And then when you reach that end of your days on the earth, you can say, I did my best and I made a difference. That's more awesome than just going to your grave and saying, I was really mad for a very long time. So what is the recipe here of our friend Mr. Marden? I boiled it down to three things: to see, to emulate, and to act. It's the way to find joy. And to his way of thinking, there's no circumstances in the world in which this is not possible. To see possibilities, to see beautiful things, to see unleashed human potential, to see wonderful things in the world, um, to see good things happening, to copy those things, to emulate them, and make them part of your own life, and then to act on your newfound knowledge and ambitions. This, to Marden, is the secret to a joyful life. The source of joy is all around us, but we have to see it. We have to seek it out and see it, embrace it, and then expand upon it. This is what encapsulates the capitalist spirit of his time and ours. So he has a number of values. By the way, and nowhere in this book does he talk about storming Washington. We're agitating for our rulers to overthrow themselves. It's never going to happen. You know, they've got the power; they don't want to give it up. Sending institutions into upheaval or agitating for social-wide transformation, and he doesn't talk about that. He speaks only to the individual, what you and your own life can do, where you are right now. He tells you what you can do in your time, right now, where you are, to bring happiness to your life. Um, and his way of thinking, the social and political change comes after that as an effect, only after we've dug deep and looked all around us and found the ways in which we can change our own world. So his values are these: work. Uh, this man loves work. Like Henry has it last week, you know, the uh, the term workaholic is not known to him. I mean, there's no downside to working more. Work is our way of bringing value to the world. It's a way of finding value within ourselves, and living the fullest possible life. We should never look down on work. We should always welcome the opportunities to work, and never stop. Always, from the morning, from when we wake up to when we go to bed, we should turn work into a joy, not a disutility, but something that brings us joy. Creativity, which is seeing things that don't yet exist, and being patient with our brains and figuring out ways to be ever more creative, to think of things in a new and fresh way that we haven't thought of before. To seek out joy, uh, be around others who are joyful, bring joyful joy to other people, um, to feel happiness, and not be afraid to be happy. We find ourselves despairing. Just, just put it on a shelf, and instead find ways to be happy, and bring happiness to others. I've had friends of mine move to new communities and tell me that I had a friend who moved to a new community, and he was depressed because he couldn't really make friends, and felt himself sort of withdrawing all the time, shy. Like me, I'm shy. I understand this, but I'm good at giving advice, right? So I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you just um, become the person in your community who's good at seeing happy things, discovering beautiful things. Too often, communities are knit together by things they don't like. Um, and all it takes is one person to change the tenor and tone of a social group and start talking about things they like. And it's a little bit of a shock, and you'll find that people are drawn to you. Like, well, that really lifted my spirits. So, are there any other things you like? Because I want to like those things too. You can change a whole kind of culture. You can try this, by the way. I really do want to get through this book, but I have to quickly tell you this story. There's probably some of you have heard it before, but I'm always intrigued by it because I go to a lot of conferences and a lot of dinners, um, where there's strangers, and maybe we sort of know each other, but not that well, sitting around maybe 8 to a table at a banquet. You sit down, everyone's looking for something to talk about, and inevitably somebody will start to complain about the food, and they'll say something like, "This roll could, I guess it could be a little fresher, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then it starts it, right? And it's like, um, yeah, boy, you're gonna be careful with my filling on this thing. And then it's gonna be like, oh God, this is all the salad dressing we have. We only have, it's always Thousand Island. Why is it always Thousand Island? How about some plain oil and vinegar? And once people start to complain, then they can actually talk and communicate with each other, which is what they want to do. But the basis on which they communicate and talk is oftentimes about the things they hate. And I was struck by this, so because it happened like the fifth time. I was like, this table's kind of depressing. I mean, we're going to sit around and complain about this all the time. Uh, so the next time I went to a dinner party like this, I decided I would set out to change this. So I broke the ice of the table by praising the roll and going, isn't this roll just awesome? This is really good. I can't get bread like this where I am. And isn't it great to think that this role is just presented to us? And at one time, it was just growing in the fields, with wheat, and all the people that were involved that brought it from the wheat fields, to put it into this little bun, to land on my table. I mean, that just inspires me. You say something like this, and suddenly people are like, "Huh, that's really interesting." Somebody said something actually interesting and fun and happy, and it'll change the tone and feel of the group. I mean, you can cause like a little bit of social uplift even in a small setting like that, just by just by talking about good things instead of dreadful things. It's actually, you should try it. It's amazing. People will be shocked, but it's fun. Okay, just moving on through the values that Marden talks about. The next one is to let go of the past, and I've been intrigued by this one because Martin in no sense was a conservative. He thought the most important thing was just to forget your regrets, to let go of the past, let bygones be bygones. Whatever hatred you have, whatever kind of sack of resentments you're dragging with you from things that didn't go well in the past, people who screwed you over in the past, that you want to get back at, regrets, things you did wrong, embarrassments. From Martin's point of view, these are absolutely debilitating. You can't ever look back at mistakes. You can learn from them, but sitting around regretting them is a terrible idea, because there's absolutely nothing you can do to change them. You know the past really well, and you know everything that went wrong. So it's easy to kind of dwell on this data that's so certain to you. What we don't see so easily is the beautiful fact that the future is yet to be created, and yet it's an open template for us to control, for us to act, to speculate and dream and realize our dreams. So instead of looking at all this back data and going, "Oh, that's terrible," why don't we look forward and say, "Well, look at the awesome possibilities. I can learn from what I did in the past, but I can do wonderful things tomorrow." And there's absolutely no day in which that's not true. So why would you spend even 1 minute looking back? Live in the present. Think about the future. Another thing he says is never feel fear. For Marden, fear is the great debilitating human emotion. To sit around and worry and rub your hands together and think about things that could go wrong, or people who are oppressing you, or your enemies who are out to kill you, eventualities that may or may not be realized. And you imagine the worst possible thing. We've all felt it, right? We all know what that's like to persist in the feeling of fear. It's the enemy of creativity. It drives away hope. It drives away happiness. It drives away creativity, and it dooms our future. If you're ever in a situation where you feel fear, says Marden, get away from it. Throw it away. Get away from that person. Get away from that situation. Stop feeling that. It's the least productive human emotion. Marden also suggests loyalty as a great benefit of a joyful life. Loyalty in the sense of friendship. Like, always remember people who have done wonderful things for you. Never betray them. Never forget the favors that others have done for you, and cultivate your friendships always. You never know when at some point in the future they'll come back around to you. I know that myself in my own life, I find myself drawing on friendships that I cultivated, like my sophomore year in college. I mean, very young, just small encounters that were pleasant and wonderful. People that did me a good turn, that I maintained good relationships with. Now, all these years later, suddenly I find myself drawing from that well of capital that has grown over the years into something that I can use for making a better future. Kind of loyalty and friendship is a very good thing. Marden suggests, and this goes back to a point I made earlier, to always spread good cheer. Now, it can be annoying when people are always spreading good cheer. Sometimes you just want to say, "Well, you should shut up." But I can tell you, it's a much better error than spreading gloom and doom all the time, which can be habitual, even, how do you say, it can be addictive. To be down in the dumps and to complain I think is a kind of an addiction. Have you ever known anybody with an addiction to complaining? It's unbelievable. Uh, it's like they started and they began to feed off whatever mental chemicals are generated in the mind through complaining and looking at the downside of everything, and it becomes like the way they function. I wonder if you've ever known anybody. I've actually known people like this who seem to have like this inability to function without complaining about other people, complaining about themselves, complaining about their health, complaining about the people they don't like, passing on gossip, unflattering information about other people, just nonstop. Becomes like an addiction. I mean, how can you be happy under those conditions? This is no way to live. It's terrible. He suggests always looking past obstacles. There's never a time when we don't face obstacles. Most of our obstacles we face in life today are legal obstacles. That wasn't true in the past. On the other hand, there were other forms of obstacles. The weather was horrible. The ability to get things to eat. Disease, what an obstacle. Arbitrary death. So many horrible, horrible obstacles in the past that generation of the late 19th century worked to overcome. All of our ancestors overcame them. Much more difficult obstacles than we face now. We don't face any of those same obstacles now. We've learned to control disease. We protect ourselves against the weather. We have enough to eat. So many of life's uncertainties have been smoothed out for us, but we face other forms of obstacles, mostly legal obstacles, terrible licensing regulations and minimum wages and wage restrictions and drinking laws and high entry costs to starting businesses and so on. But we have to look past the obstacles, work past the obstacles, in every age, in all times. It's not just our time. We are not uniquely debilitated. In fact, we probably have more opportunities in our time than any generation in the past. Another piece of advice, he says, is to always be kind to others. And I think it's a simple point. How many times have we been told this in our lives? But how often do we practice it, really? To be genuinely kind to others? Politics encourages us exactly the opposite way. We're always encouraged to look for enemies, find out who's screwing us over, who we have to be suspicious of, who's trying to steal my stuff, who's trying to rob me of my future, who's the bad guy in my presence. This is not a prescription for living a happy life. Being kind to others not only brings others good cheer, makes their lives better, but it actually makes you happy too. If you haven't tried it in a while, give it a try. You'll see. Marden strongly emphasizes staying out of debt. Debt is a very strange form of slavery. If you're in debt, you never sleep as well. You can never get ahead. The money you make is not really yours. It really belongs to somebody else. You're living ahead of where you are materially, where you should be. And it's the surest way to wreck a life. To find yourself in debt, a little more in debt, a little more in debt, and it piles up. 6 months, a year, 2 years. Next thing you know, you're being devoured, and you see no way out. I mean, it's one way we kill ourselves, by being in debt. And wouldn't you know it, the government encourages that kind of debt. The government, through its low interest rate policies, it wants us to borrow as much as possible, live beyond our means. This is a prescription for misery. Stay out of debt as a path to happiness, according to Marden. He also says that we need to live a life of balance, one that weighs equally the need for material wealth and money and the need for beauty around us. And I get this. This is a really interesting corrective. Sometimes we really do forget to consume beautiful things. I know I do. I'll get on a path of work that becomes relentless, and it just goes hours after hours after hours in a silent space that's unchanging, with nothing to look at but the wall, desperately trying to finish a project. And I find myself overly consumed by this sort of. He talks about the need for money, but which I guess is what drives it, right? But he says that we should always balance this out with the need for beauty. So, and these can happen in simple ways. Put on some music, go outside, um, uh, pay attention to others, have a good conversation. Beauty and Marden's, to experience beauty, uh, from Marden's point of view, is just as important as the experience of the ethic of working or achieving your material ambitions. Um, to experience beauty is sometimes uh, becomes the font of being more productive in life otherwise. And finally, Marden suggests that we never, ever, no matter what we ever do, lose our ideals. I think this is a difficult one for all of us, and I think it's particularly difficult for libertarians because we so often don't see our ideals realized in this world. We live in a world of scam artists and pillagers and liars and manipulation and propaganda and cynicism, and here we are, uh, holding on to the ideals of peace and virtue and prosperity and universal human rights, a good society where everything happens voluntarily. I mean, how do you square these ideals with the world around us? I mean, too often what happens is that libertarians live these ideals until they start seeming impractical, and we go, look, this is dumb. Now, it's one thing for me to have these ideals, but if I live in a world where I'm punished for them, where nobody else seems to hold them, what good are they really? And we give them up, and we embrace a different worldview. We go from being libertarians to becoming, adherents of the dark enlightenment, or believing in some kind of blood and soil ideologies, or thinking this world is utterly hopeless. I might as well join the pillaging with the rest of them. Get while I can, while I can. I mean, to Marden, this is not a pathway to changing the world. You always have to hold on to your ideals. If you ever give them up, you've kind of given up the essence of your heart and soul. Never give them up. As for daily discouragements and obstacles, yeah, they're unavoidable features of life. They exist in all times and all places. You can never get rid of the enemies of your personal progress, but you can make the most of things as they are. And of course of this, we all make blunders and mistakes, and we have reasons to criticize ourselves. But criticizing ourselves can be very unproductive. You can't accomplish anything for the future, he says, if your gaze is always backwards in the past. The right attitude of an entrepreneur, he writes, is to think of the past as dead. Dead, it's gone, it's done, it's over. And tomorrow as not yet born. The only time that really belongs to us, that we own, is right here and now. We can't change past, but the passing moment is ours. It's something we're creating on an ongoing basis. And if we dedicate ourselves to making the best out of the present, one decision and action at a time, we can make ourselves a great future for ourselves. And he goes further to say that the art of living is the art of living in the today. Very interesting. A few last points here that I want to cover. And these are things that break the human personality, according to Marden. Really interesting practical stuff. Marden says to have a bad temper is the worst human tendency. That temper is terrible. It leads to, he says, public humiliation. It's not possible to lose your temper and not experience a public humiliation and making an awful and unforgettable spectacle of yourself in front of those whose opinion of you value most highly. So controlling your temper is extremely important. To have a temper demonstrates for everyone a loss of control over your own brain. And so you're kind of revealing your inner brute. That's a humiliation. You can't quite recover from it. Everything we normally try to hide in life, meanness, nastiness, viciousness, resentment, temper puts them all on display. in front of your friends, in front of your coworkers, in front of your loved ones, always avoid it. There's no conditions under which it does any good. Controlling your temper is then a key to success. And he goes further to say this is even true of moods, um, that we must strive. And of course, we can't, none of us can accomplish this finally, but we should always strive to control our moods. Um, you have to be the master of your moods to be really happy and really successful. Um, Two last points here. One is the habit of envy. He addresses this directly. What is envy? Envy is different from jealousy. Jealousy, to be jelly of somebody, is to wish that you had their car, to wish that you had their friends, to wish you had another person's good looks, opportunities in life. You know, jealousy is something we've all felt and we do feel, but envy takes it a next step. To envy is to seek, to wish harm on a person because he or she has something that you don't have. So you actually wish ill on the person rather than just being jealous. You're actively seeking ways to bring them down. It's resenting the success of others and wanting bad things to come to those who are evidently achieving things. It's a very common feature of the human spirit, but it's catastrophic for the heart and the soul. And what do we get really if we see somebody who's has more than we have, more success, uh, more looks, more beauty, more achievement in life, and we bring them down? What does that get us personally? At the end of the day, we'll find ourselves exactly in the same position we were in before. Um, so envy accomplishes nothing. Instead of envy, uh, when you begin to feel it, when you feel jealousy, the thing to do is to emulate. You look at that person and say, okay, this person has something I don't have. Uh, what methods did he or she use to succeed? What are the keys that this person is doing? What are the things he's doing right that I can myself adopt as my own and maybe just improve? So instead of feeling envy, you turn jealousy into emulation. Then you get on the right path. And then you can even learn to cheer others on. And I tell you, that's really true. If you can learn to genuinely and sincerely appreciate and praise other people for their own achievements that you are not personally sharing in, that is an awesome thing. And it will be noticed, it will be recognized. When you are happy for the success of another person, there's nothing that feels better for that person and then ultimately for you. Um, and what happens is that when you cheer on other people's success, then they become your allies as you try to make for your own success. You've suddenly got a person on your team because they don't forget. He was happy when I succeeded. I want to be happy about his success. It's the way it works. Turn jealousy not to envy, but to emulation. And then you build up a team around you cheering you on. Okay, one final point here, and it's the way he ends this book because I'm thinking about this Marden guy, right? So let me just try to figure out. He died in 1924. He was born in 1850, so he's writing this at the age of 63, which now doesn't sound that old, but 1913, I was really getting up there, right? So he has some really interesting advice, and I copied it down here because I think he of all people would um, have something interesting to say about the subject of old age. And he says this, he says, strong advice for old age: never stop learning, never stop extracting information from those around you. Find out who knows stuff, ask them about it, learn from them. Never stop trying to improve your life. Never stop trying to have a better life. Even in your twilight years, never stop. And never stop thinking of every day as brand new. That's hard. The older you get, the more the easier it is to look at the world and say, "Holy criminy, this is the same old crap again and again and again. We never learn. It just keeps repeating itself. This world is a dreadful bore. You want to know why old people are sometimes grumpy? That's why they get tired of it. They get tired of the absence of improvement and the repetition of evil and fallacy and error and ignorance and stupidity. It gets boring. Marden says that's a path to unhappiness, and every day on this world is a gift. So every day deserves to be joyful. So you must always remember that every day in this world is brand new and offers new opportunities, new chances for new forms of self improvement, um, and for the world to flourish in an ever better way. Every day is brand new. Nothing is determined. We create our futures. These are the keys, he says. These habits are the key to retaining youth even until your last breath. So someday I want to clip that and put that somewhere, and when I'm my last days on earth, I want to be able to read Marden and recall these words. I think they're really powerful. Let me finish up here with just a few choice quotations I like from this book. Books make it possible for every person born into the world to begin where the previous generation left off. That's nice, isn't it? I really like that. Man was made for growth, to realize poise of mind, peace, satisfaction. It is the object, the explanation of his being, to have an ambition, to grow larger and broader every day, to push the horizon of one's ignorance a little further away, to become a little richer in knowledge, a little wiser, more of a man. That is an ambition worthwhile. A couple other final quotes. Do not flatter yourself that you can be really happy unless you are really useful. Happiness and usefulness were born twins. To separate them is fatal. Isn't he a good writer? The greatest conqueror of any age is a cheerful, hopeful, and loving spirit. One of man's greatest passions is that of achievement, the passion for doing things, the ambition to accomplish. Well, anyway, that's my introduction to Orison Swett Marden. Old fashioned will never see his like again, I tell you. This is why this book is such a treasure. It allows you to look back, different time, different place, different way of thinking, extract that information, pull that wisdom, I would say, from this amazingly successful, remarkably erudite, fascinating man. Thanks for spending the evening with me. This hour went by so quickly. I don't know how it happens. There's so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but we're just going to leave it there. Thank you for being a member of Liberty.me and enjoying and being on this journey that we're all on to make the world a better place. All the best to you. Take care, my friends. Night, night.